Welcome, everyone, to the third episode of Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. As you already know, my name is Amanda Kelly, and I am the Junior Risk Consultant at Plan to Protect, as well as the host of these weekly podcasts, which are going to be tackling topics of safety with a focus on achieving that highest standard of abuse prevention and protection for that vulnerable sector. These sessions are geared primarily to individuals and organizations that are serving that vulnerable sector, whether you're positioned at a school or a camp, a church, other organizations that are servicing that vulnerable sector. So last week we covered the question, how do we secure buy-in from leadership? Melodie provided us with a lot of tips on securing buy-in, everything from sharing resources and books and inviting in guest speakers, telling stories, all the way up to inviting your leaders to subscribe to our podcasts and blogs. And once again, Melodie is back with us. Melodie Bissell, the Plan to Protect CEO and President, and the expert in all things vulnerable sector protection. But today we also have with us Ruth Bell Asselin. And Ruth is a really good friend of Plan to Protect, a coach to our team, and she has 30 years of experience working in the insurance industry.
Ruth, it's so good to have you with us and joining us today. You have taught me so much over the years. We've known each other for many, many years. So much of what I know I've learned from you. Tell me what you enjoyed the most about working in insurance and what you liked the least about working in insurance.
Wow. I would have to say the variety. You just really never know what to expect from a call every day. Everything was always different, especially during my 15 years of insuring churches and charities in Canada. We talked to leaders and boards that ranged from $10,000 annual budgets all the way to multi-millions. They met in shopping malls, movie theaters, huge multifunctional buildings and mega churches. Honestly, one call you would get would be to help them insure live animal exhibits for a Bethlehem presentation at Christmas. Churches wanted fireworks inside the buildings. And then, of course, you would have just your regular Sunday school picnics with ice cream cones and balloons. But another organization wanted to try lawnmower races or power tool contests. So, of course, we had to say no to that. But there is no limit to imagination with these organizations. So the variety was super interesting, especially because I thought doing just one type of insurance would actually be boring. And we just really never had a boring day. We would often say just another day in Christian ministry, because it would be so interesting. I think for my least, though, it was really the number of emails that we got every day. They were just unbearable sometimes. And along with that came computer problems. And I found them the most difficult, I suppose, because I couldn't fix anything myself. But I always laughed when I remembered a boss that would scream out loud. I remember when all you had to do was worry about your pencil. So that spoke to me. I was a lot younger than him, but I remember just having to worry if your pencil broke.
Well, the question we have that we're talking about today in our podcast is one that you have answered many, many, many times in your career. Amanda?
Yeah, so today, if our listeners haven't guessed already, we're going to be focusing our attention on insurance. I've noticed since coming to Plan to Protect that there are a number of insurance companies that recommend us to their clients. So we often have a lot of questions about insurance. So this week's question is, can insurance companies really exclude abuse coverage as part of their general liability? And what is meant by an exclusion clause?
Well, of course they can, and they do exclude things. And I think that's every client's concern, is what's covered and what isn't covered. So it's always wise to ask before you think or decide for yourself. An exclusion to a policy is loss or damage that just simply isn't covered. There will not be a claim paid out for that type of an incident. With every insurance policy, you'll read what it covers and also what's excluded. Common exclusions for every policy would be terrorism attacks, nuclear wars or cyber breaches, acts of God, we used to call it, or divine intervention, and of course, physical or sexual abuse is now excluded on most policies.
This seems like such a reoccurring theme, and we hear this so often from our clients. And as many of you know, I have to humbly admit that in 2000, when I was an executive director of a children's charity, I was informed that our coverage was suspended as we did not qualify for abuse. That was a pretty scary time and not a happy time for me as a leader.
I can imagine. So, has this always been the case that insurance companies are suspending or disqualifying or even just excluding overall abuse coverage?
Well, to kind of bring it into context, if you remember, you may not, Amanda, but hopefully a lot of our viewers will, after the 9/11 terrorism attacks, the insurance policies almost immediately began to exclude acts of terrorism. Prior to that, that was not excluded. And then until recently, there was no cyber breach exclusion because it wasn't really a known risk. And now, of course, it's the insurance companies can't control the risks of cyber breach, so they've made an exclusion. So during the 1980s, there was a huge rise in civil claims, and criminal cases against religious organizations, also secular organizations, but due to abuse committed against children in their care. More so in the States, but by the mid-90s, even the Canadian insurers started to exclude physical and sexual abuse claims within the liability wordings of a policy.
So, why the exclusion then? So, is there specific reasoning? Why can't organizations just like pay extra and purchase that coverage?
It's funny because really, primarily, it's financial. Insurance companies, they want to make money. They have to make money to stay in business themselves, so they can continue to pay claims that can be covered ongoing. Secondly, physical and sexual abuse claims, they were coming up all over the place, out of nowhere really, and there's no statute of limitations for bringing a sexual abuse claim forward, there just was no way for the actuaries to predict the future losses the same way and using the same logic as with terrorism attacks, cyber, and mold in our homes. They just had to control it for future financial stability.
Okay, so then is this where those insurance requirements come into place?
Well, exactly, because without the insurance requirements and I would say without the efforts of even Church Protection Plus, I worked with Robertson Hall for 15 years, and without their efforts to provide physical and sexual abuse to the churches and charities and organizations, without their real work to negotiate a way forward, there was going to be no coverage for anyone. Other companies did try to establish some requirements and regulations to procure some abuse liability, and that came in the form of abuse prevention plans. Without that, there would literally, without having an approved abuse prevention plan, there would be no way forward with having coverage.
So that would be kind of scary, especially because I'm sure that there's an absolute massive penalty for an incident of abuse.
Well, I can think of 3 incidences in the last number of years where 3 dioceses had to pay out millions of dollars. I know of one that had to pay out, and this was in Canada. In the United States, the penalties are so much greater, but I can think of 3 dioceses, one that had to pay out $13 million, one that had to pay out $5 million, one that had to pay out $3.2 million. And there were class action suits again with many victims that joined into those lawsuits. Most recently, I can remember reading about a diocese that actually took their insurance company and filed a claim against the insurance company because the insurance company had denied the payout. They said that there were individuals that knew about the abuse but never reported the abuse, and that was one of the criteria for qualifying for abuse. So they denied the coverage. They ended up appealing. The appeal was granted, and now it may even go up to Superior Court because there becomes this argument between the diocese or the organization and the insurance company. And in the meantime, many people are suffering.
So, Ruth, is this common? Do you see this a lot?
Well, thankfully, no. These big, scary numbers don't come up often. The thoughts of them come up a lot. But really, whether the numbers are high or low, all the cases are very scary. Lives are ruined, and the damage is endless. From my experience and the claims that I saw and knew about, really, the damage was within the relationships of the organizations, with each other, with the community, with the additional injury to the family of the victims and the perpetrator. The injury was so far spread that it couldn't be corralled. And some organizations really didn't withstand the trial of this experience or this terror. And they ended up closing, they ended up splitting. There was so much damage from that, more than financial. Although the financial damage is huge because of really the legal costs and the emotional injury as well was just incalculable. That being said, multiple cases of abuse within the diocese that Melodie's talking about, they warrant huge settlements. There's multiple cases of abuse. There's absolute negligence on the part of the leadership to report the perpetrator. So I want to bring up kind of some insurance terms here, though, that are a bit intimidating, unless you've spent 15 years doing it, I suppose. But there's things like compensatory damages, and there's punitive damages that some of these articles and situations talk about. And really, there's three kinds of damages when there's a lawsuit. One is compensatory damage, and that's to compensate for a loss or to reimburse for damage. After that, there's exemplary damages that can be awarded by a judge, and that is the judge trying to make an example of that organization for allowing these situations to occur or the damages to occur. Punitive damages are a judge giving a punishment to that organization for allowing the situation to occur or continue. In the States and now in Canada, all of these damages can be awarded at the judge's discretion. But you'd be wise to take note that most policies only cover the compensatory damages. So be very sure to check your policy to make sure you have coverage for all three. Now that the court systems are trying to make an example of these matters, they are trying to assign punishments for allowing them to continue, especially with historic abuse within one diocese or organization like we've just heard about.
Right. Okay. So we often have or have had clients that just really don't want to put that effort into even qualifying for abuse coverage. They think, we're part of a very tight-knit church. We know everybody. We don't need this. It's never going to happen here, which I think is a little bit crazy.
Ruth, I don't know if you remember, but I'm sure I told you this. I shared it over a dinner with you sometime, that we had a client that actually told us that they had made the decision that they were not going to have insurance anymore. They felt that it was too much work to qualify for abuse coverage. So they said they don't care. They were just going to go ahead and not have insurance anymore. And I responded to them at the time that if they were going to make that decision, I don't know who made that decision initially. I don't know if it was just one person or if it was a board or council that made that decision. But I can remember saying to them at the time that if you're making a decision like that, then you need to make sure that you include all the stakeholders, that that decision not be made by just one or two people. It needs to be made by a whole board because they could be certainly held liable. But I also believe that it's so important that they tell their members that they are making that kind of decision, and their staff and their volunteers, because good abuse coverage provides such comprehensive insurance and coverage for so many people that I think that it's so important that they include everyone in a decision like that. I don't think it's a wise decision to make. What are the benefits of really good insurance? I hinted to them. I think that there are so many good benefits, but I think you can describe it so much better than I can.
Well, of course, I remember these situations. We would have people just angry as hornets, my dad would say, about having to do these abuse prevention plans. And some would just say they're just going to trust God and try to do without insurance. But faith isn't a substitute for wisdom. Faith isn't a substitute for the things that we can do to prevent injury and damage. So with or without insurance, when I made presentations to boards throughout my career, I would say with or without coverage, you should want a prevention plan. The coverage, having a prevention plan makes the coverage possible, but you should still want to be providing the best safety and care for those vulnerable within your organization and within your care, especially within a religious setting where we're called by God literally to care for the little ones. So, but really at the end of the day, it sort of was just a hurdle of change, that people were scared of this change. Once they understood, it became a lot easier. And of course, I was there as well. I didn't understand, why all of these things were necessary. But with years of experience and hearing the phone ring with instances of abuse and examples of claims, it becomes very quick to know that it's absolutely necessary to have an abuse prevention plan, claim or insurance or not. At the end of the day, though, again, most people want the coverage. They just were afraid of the change and afraid of the huge responsibility and job of getting the coverage with a new abuse prevention plan. But that's what makes Plan to Protect so beneficial. It's the help. And now it's the years of expertise to assist organizations to do a very good job of having an abuse prevention plan. Do you know the most common problem we found was churches making an abuse prevention plan but not following it, filing it in a drawer but not doing it. And we had legal experts tell us, you would be better to not have a plan than to have a plan and not follow it. So, we between our organization and the insurance companies and Robertson Hall with Church Protection Plus, we have done our very best to educate and help the organizations to do a good job of it. But I would say maybe 5 or 6 years after it was a requirement, the frustration and the avoidance became less and less, thankfully, because there was some nasty calls for a few years. But again, that's change occurring for people, and change is difficult for everyone.
So, Ruth, often we get a lot of our clients calling and saying, what do they actually need in terms of what kind of coverage that they're getting and also what's included in that? Would you be able to speak to that?
Absolutely. I can speak in terms of what our policy with Church Protection Plus provided. And I can say that, by limit, the standard limits these days are between 2 and 5 million, but the limits are not all equal. You have to check the differences in the details. There are a lot of differences in the details of a policy wordings, and you should know if your coverage is occurrence-based or claims-made based. That's hard language, and I won't pretend to try and teach it right here on this podcast, but if you have any questions, call your broker and make sure which coverage you have and why, and it's very important. Make sure it covers the legal costs of the organization. Make sure it has counseling costs for the victims. Make sure it covers all three damages again, the compensatory, the punitive, and the exemplary. There's also coverage for reimbursement of legal costs if there had been a false allegation. That individual can collect their legal costs if they're found to have been innocent. Your broker would have the experience of handling these matters. They make all the difference when there's a claim. A good broker, we used to wonder what we were really worth, a broker, because we really just sold the policy and the insurance company handles the claim after that. But we have the experience of understanding all the ramifications to do with media exposure, to proposing the most qualified lawyers to handle individual and the particular cases that arise in these circumstances. So a broker or the agent that you're working with is of utmost importance with these kind of sensitive issues.
So Ruth, you're kind of making it seem like a no-brainer for organizations to really be pursuing abuse coverage, because obviously the risks are very, very significant if you don't have that coverage. I'm sure we can all speak to the importance of why organizations should have really good coverage, but let's hear it. Ruth and Melodie, what would you say to our listeners as to the value of securing that coverage?
Well, honestly, the coverage is usually free. There's really no charge for abuse liability on your policy, except that you are required to have an approved abuse prevention plan. So this is the part of our conversation that, yes, it's a no-brainer. And then if you want to reflect into your own mind and your heart, why would you want this coverage? Why would you want an abuse prevention plan? You just say, where would you rather send your children? Where they do an abuse prevention plan, where they exhibit this kind of duty of care, it is a no-brainer.
Whether it's free or not, and I know some insurance companies do charge a little bit for the coverage, but it's not a lot. So yes, I too think that it's a no-brainer, but I think from an ethical perspective, I also think that it's a way for organizations to demonstrate that they really care for the people that they're engaging with, whether that is your staff members and volunteers. I think that's huge. I personally don't want to volunteer in an organization that does not have insurance coverage. It demonstrates to me that they are operating with wisdom and care. I think it ethically, from a perspective of longevity of the organization, and valuing and demonstrating your care to those individuals that have invested in your organization, your donors, those that have invested their time and their energy. I also really believe that it provides care to those that are coming in the future. I don't think we can do much from a prevention perspective for those that have been abused in the past. We want to care for victims, survivors of abuse, but we can make a difference by achieving a high standard of protection for those that are coming up in the next generation.
So I just want to touch on quickly that idea of duty of care. And also, I also want to talk a little bit about standard of care because we've been talking about the standard of protection, but also there is a standard of care. So there is that legal obligation to be taking reasonable care of personnel and participants, to avoid foreseeable harm. So that can look like screening staff and volunteers properly, doing building inspections, supervision procedures, emergency systems procedures as well. But the difference there between the duty of care and standard of care. So, standard of care is established after the duty of care. So, what it means is the actions that an organization can actually reasonably take to uphold that duty of care, that legal obligation owed to their staff, their volunteers, their participants, the organization as a whole. So, it kind of looks like how an organization or a person should be acting with that necessary amount of care. So negligence, which is something that we do see come up a lot, it's a tort. It's measured by establishing, that duty of care, determining whether there was a breach in that standard of care, causation, which is the cause and effect relationship or the act and omission relationship to the outcome and the harm, reasonable foreseeability, and also the extent of the harm. So that's what they're all taking into consideration to determine whether someone is negligent or vicariously negligent. So I just really wanted to emphasize that a little bit as well, because there's both that duty of care as well as that standard of care that should be taken into account for organizations.
Thank you, Amanda. You explained that very nicely. That's excellent.
Yeah, well said, Amanda.
Thank you. So I believe that, Ruth, it has been really, really good to have you with us today. Not often do we get to have someone from that insurance perspective to be speaking on that importance. We often get clients just asking us directly. So I think it'll be really helpful for them to have really had that opportunity to get to hear exactly from you, hear from that insurance perspective as to, what's included, why it needs to be included, and how to be doing that.
Thank you.
I agree, Ruth. Thank you so much. You came from out of retirement to talk about insurance today. So I really, really appreciate that so very much. I am so grateful for our insurance company partners because they refer so many other clients to us, and we really appreciate that. Each one of our services at Plan to Protect helps organizations qualify for abuse coverage, from policy templates to screening and training, providing professional development, coaching. We love our clients, and we want to not only help them protect the vulnerable sector, but we love when the bonus add, the value add is to help them achieve that abuse coverage with their insurance companies.
Actually, Melodie, you've left this off as a really good stepping stone to lead us to our sponsorship today. Last week, it was the Crisis Response and Management course. This week, it is our implementation membership, which our clients absolutely love, especially when just getting started with obtaining their abuse coverage and implementing those strategies and responsibilities that they have to. So the benefits of this program for position leaders, it has everything that they really need to meet those qualifications of insurance coverage. So while it might seem daunting, Ruth mentioned, Plan to Protect is here to help. And with the implementation membership, that's exactly how we do that. So it goes from, customized policies with their procedures and forms, certification for an administrator, certification for a trainer to get that training done, 10 online training registrations for anyone that maybe can't attend in person for your certified trainer. There's consistent email and phone support, which is ongoing through your entire membership. There's also discounts on screening, which is very, very valuable, and also access to ongoing professional development with our special interest webinars that we have twice a month. Those are just included with your membership, and they're really, really, really helpful. Some people that maybe don't have a membership, they still will tune in every single time because they know how valuable that monthly teaching is. So if you're really interested in that, absolutely contact our office. Without further ado, Melodie and Ruth, thank you so much for today. You both gave so much information, and I'm sure our listeners will feel that that's really, really valuable. Do either of you have any final words for today?
Oh, thank you for having me. It's kind of fun to be back in the saddle, I have to admit. So please don't tell anybody like Ken Hall that it was enjoyable to discuss these insurance matters. It really was a pleasure to be here, but also thank you so much for Plan to Protect and all that you're doing to help the organizations achieve the requirements that they have to qualify for the important coverage. Thank you so much.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much to both of you and for our listeners for tuning in. So, goodbye, everyone, and have a fantastic day. And we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.